Louie Tee. Welcome to the 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series where your man Louie Tee aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2019 NFL Draft using our baseball grading scale. Single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts here in the Draft Wrap-Up Series as we cannot tell how these players are going to pan out, and I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so we'll get a score for each and every single individual player in said team's draft. We'll apply bonuses when necessary, tally up an overall score, divide by the number of picks, which will yield us an overall grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series picked by you. That's right, you, the viewer, are in total control as this is the You Pick format. Simply be the first to leave a comment in the comment section of this and future videos in this series stating two things: the phrase next and the team you'd like to see next. Some examples: Broncos next, Denver, Denver next, Mile High next. You get where I'm going with this. As a matter of fact, the next team up in the series is none other than the Denver Broncos. And it's amazing what a draft can do for an organization. John Elway, I'm not saying he was on a hot seat, but there were some rumblings and some grumblings about, hey man, John has really been effing stuff up lately, man. This is not how this thing's supposed to go. He was supposed to get us Kirk Cousins. We were supposed to be a real competitor and a real big team in the AFC West and a team that could be seriously contending for a Super Bowl. Instead, you got Case Keenum. And Case Keenum wasn't even all that bad, but he's Case Keenum. Again, remember that. He's Case Keenum for a reason. And so things didn't go the way that it was supposed to in Denver. And for the first time since like the 1970s, the Denver Broncos had back-to-back losing seasons. And so, yeah, there was a little bit of a panic. This draft here, coupled with Joe Flacco. Now, I don't know how excited Broncos fans are for that. You know, I'm a big Joe Flacco apologist. So I think Joe, if given the right circumstances, the right weaponry, in the right situation, can flourish. I'm not saying he's going to be a world beater, but you put Joe in a situation to succeed, and I think Joe might be able to do something for the Denver Broncos. We'll see what happens, but you couple that move with the draft, and everyone was talking about how great of a draft the Broncos. I said, hey, well, let me see just how good this damn draft was anyway, all right? I know some of the big names, Noah Fant and, you know, Drew Lock and Dalton Reisner. Yeah, let's just see how good this draft was. I'm here to tell you. This damn draft was pretty damn good. As a matter of fact, I don't know if anybody's going to top it score-wise. I mean, it was that damn good. It was thorough, and it was in and out, man. Get my 6 players and get the hell out of Dodge. And, you know, I'm a huge fan of the milk, egg, bread, and cheese draft model where you just, hey, got a list of items. I'm going to go in here, grab my items, and I'm going to get out. All right? That's what John Elway did, and I must say, I'm not a huge John Elway fan. If you've been listening to my podcast, Louie Tee Network podcast, all right? If you've been listening to the Louie Tee Network podcast, you know, I'm not a huge John Elway guy. I think he's a jerk when it comes to a human being side of things. Again, I don't know him personally, but just listening to stories from people and then watching his mannerisms, I think John Elway is probably an asshole. However, John Elway won a Super Bowl. I know it was with Peyton Manning, and I know it was with an elite defense, but he's won a Super Bowl in Denver as a player and as a general manager, and maybe he can bring some magic back after a hell of a draft in 2019. Let's take a look at what the Broncos were able to do. We'll start in the first round where they traded back, and I think that's one of the biggest caveats to this first pick is they traded back and still got a player that they were probably considering at the 10th overall selection in Iowa tight end Noah Fant, who they took 20th overall after trading back with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Broncos traded back from 10, allowed the Steelers to come up to the 10th pick, move back to 20, and in moving back, they picked up the 20th pick, the 52nd pick in the second round, and a 2020 third rounder. And so they got a nice little haul for moving back 10 spots in the first round. And what they ultimately did was they parlayed that 52nd pick into a quarterback in the second round. We'll talk about that here in a second. But first, Noah Fant. I've already broken him down. So if you're looking for a thorough breakdown of Noah Fant, including film, check out my Draft Prospects 101 series where I was able to break down Noah Fant among other prospects prior to the 2019 NFL Draft. So I'm not going to do that here as I've already done that, but I love Noah Fant. I love his game. I think he's got a little bit of ways to go as a blocker, and I think there are some things he needs to clean up as a route runner. But if you're talking from an athletically gifted standpoint, if you're talking about from an ability to separate, you won't find one better in this draft at the tight end position than Noah Fant. The two Iowa tight ends, to me, were head and shoulders above the rest of the crop of tight ends in this draft, and they were the lone two tight ends to go in the first round, and deservingly so. And Noah Fant is a big-time pass catcher, the likes of which Joe Flacco hasn't seen, I dare to say, since the days of Todd Heap in Baltimore. And this guy's way better than what Todd Heap was as a receiver at the tight end position. So I think this is a big get. Joe Flacco is always at his best when he's got a tight end to throw the football to. And you go back to his Baltimore days, and when he was at his best, the tight end position was always prevalent in his success. And so this was a major get. And the Broncos now have 87 tight ends on the roster. It seems like they've been drafting tight ends for the last 5 years. All of them get hurt. None of them pan out. They're still waiting on Jake Butt. The Jeff Hireman experiment is still, I guess, going on and being conducted as we speak. You name it, they've done it at the tight end position. They drafted the Wisconsin kid a couple of years ago. I haven't seen him. So, again, they've tried at the tight end position. It's not for a lack of effort, but I think this is the end-all, be-all here. I think you finally can put all of that to rest, and all of those other guys, when they come along, can come along as second or third options at the tight end position, because now you have a legitimate number one in Noah Fant out of Iowa. Love the selection. You already know what this is. I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to show you anyway. In the first round, 20th overall selection, to trade back and pick up additional draft capital that you would later parlay into more of a big-time pick for you in this draft. I love it. Love it. In the first round, 20th overall selection, tight end out of Iowa, Noah Fant, for me, is...
Hits it high! Hits it deep! It is out of here!
And as I've mentioned before on my Draft Prospects 101 series, in case you haven't watched it, the comp for Noah Fant is Easy E. Eric Ebron, who had a breakout year in Indianapolis for the Colts this past year with Andrew Luck tossing him the rock. I think he had 13 touchdown grabs this year, and that, of course, was a career high for him. That's what Noah Fant reminds me of. And remember, it was a big deal when Eric Ebron came out of North Carolina. Remember, he was a top 10 pick, going 10th overall to the Detroit Lions. He was a pretty big deal in that draft, and I think Noah Fant can be the same for the Denver Broncos. So we now move on to the second round, where the Denver Broncos did some serious damage. They had their own pick, which this is right here, the 41st pick in the second round. Offensive lineman Dalton Reisner is the selection for the Denver Broncos. So Dalton Reisner was one of my favorite offensive linemen in this draft. After Jonah Williams, to me, Dalton Reisner, irregardless of position, center, guard, tackle, I just put all my offensive linemen in one basket, and he was my second best offensive lineman prospect in this draft. And so Jonah Williams came off the board relatively early, as we anticipated he would. I think he went 11 or 12 to Cincinnati. And then we didn't see another offensive lineman come off the board until the mid-20s or so. But in any event, I thought Reisner would be one of the, first round offensive linemen. I thought he'd be one of those guys that went in the mid-20s somewhere. Houston would have been a great landing destination for him, I thought. But I was wrong. And he found his way to the second round, and the Broncos, to me, got themselves a steal. As you can see, the tight end position has been addressed. Now, offensive line has been addressed as well. We'll take that off the board, as the Broncos, to me, had a plethora of needs going into the draft. Offensive line, defensive line, quarterback, tight end, linebacker, and wide receiver. And I put them in the order in which I think of the importance of those needs. offensive line to me being the biggest, because if you're going to go out and get Joe Flacco, you better be able to protect him. And they went out and got Juwann James in the offseason, but you lost Matt Paredes, so you need you just need more depth. You need more competition. You need more bodies. So I thought it was imperative. You lost Billy Turner as well. I thought it was imperative that you made more moves in the offseason, in the draft, and getting a guy like Dalton Reisner. And right now, I don't know what position he's going to play. Excuse me. Broncos have him listed as just an offensive lineman. The guy's versatile, as we know. He can probably kick inside and play guard. We know he can play center. As a matter of fact, let's get into his breakdown quickly. 6'5", 312 pounds stands Dalton Reisner, 34-inch arms, so that's more than enough length if he were to stay outside at tackle. But right now, you feel good about your tackle position, so I'm assuming he's going to kick inside, probably the center right now. I think that's the position that most likely fits him as we speak right now. Things could change. It's a fluid situation. The Broncos just had an interior offensive lineman go down in the mini camp, and so he's going to be lost for the season. So things can change. It's a fluid situation, but I think right now, Dalton Reisner most likely going to be your day one center if I had to pencil him into a position at this very moment. A durable, versatile offensive lineman with experience at center, 13 career starts there, and right tackle, 36 career starts at right tackle. That will serve him well at the next level. His technique remains rock solid from snap to snap, so the quality doesn't fluctuate, which is part of the reason I love this guy coming out of K-State. You pretty much know what you're going to get. There isn't any guesswork necessary here. As you watch tape on him and you continue to watch, you see the same repetitions over and over and over again. Him latching on to a defensive lineman, him not letting go, him doing his job. And then hit the repeat button and watch him do it all over again. Solid in pass pro with adequate length to push speed rushers around the pocket. He does lunge from time to time. That's the one time you see him really get outside of his frame, get off balance, and can get beat. He got beat by Montez Sweat one time. And we know Montez Sweat was a big-time edge rusher for Mississippi State. Would have been a top 10 prospect if not for the heart irregulation or irregularities and some of the discrepancies about some of his off-the-field mannerisms. But nonetheless, that's a top 10 talent in Montez Sweat, and he held his own against Sweat, pretty much shutting him out except for one pressure. But he lunged on that particular play. Sweat was able to take advantage and get by him. And when he loses, generally it's because he's lunging. When he is with a clean base and erect and upright, you won't find many better in this draft at keeping guys in front of him. Sturdy against the bull rush. I didn't see him bull rush one time on tape, so I don't feel like that's an issue that needs to be addressed. And enough grit and nastiness to be effective in the run game. I'll tell you a quick story. So I'm watching him against Oklahoma. No, I'm watching him against Texas. And he gets to the second level. He devours a safety. I mean, literally pushes them 2 yards onto the ground, down the field. And he just gave him a two-hand chuck, and the safety goes flying. And then, to make matters worse, he takes 3 hard charging steps and plops down on that safety. I mean, it was the most vicious kill shot I've seen of a pancake job of an offensive lineman in quite some time. It was so disgustingly beautiful that I had to rewind it a couple of times and just chuckle in amazement and sheer joy from watching him destroy that safety. And that's the kind of nastiness that this guy comes equipped with as well. Gets to the second level with well enough, and doesn't misfire in space. I didn't see him miss. Like, a lot of times with these guys, they get in space, and it's hard for them to lock onto a target and then actually make contact and stay engaged. He doesn't have that problem. He gets to the second level. Generally, he seeks out a target and doesn't miss. He makes contact, and he's able to stay onto that target and stay initiated with that target. So I was actually really pleased with him in that regard as well. Tremendous sustain and the durability. He only missed one game out of 50 possible starts in his career. He missed one game, and that was to have shoulder surgery during the team's bowl game in 2017, so he wouldn't miss any time in 2018, which he did not. So he doesn't miss very much time either And so this guy can be relied upon. So I said all of that to say this. I love Riley Reiff. I talked about this guy profusely during my draft party and throughout this entire process, and how I think he's going to be an outstanding offensive lineman. And it really doesn't matter where you play him. Other than left tackle, I think he can be successful at any position at the next level. Both guard positions, if need be, he can be kicked inside too. He played right tackle. He's probably most comfortable there, but also can play center and probably play that extremely well in addition to the other positions. So I think you can't really go wrong wherever you decide to place this guy. I think he's going to be an outstanding addition to this Broncos offensive line that has had their struggles at times. And I think he's going to come in and be an awesome pick for the Broncos right away in the second round. 41st overall selection, offensive tackle out of Kansas State, Dalton Reisner, for me, is...
Hits it high! Hits it deep! It is out of here!
And when you're thinking about Dalton Reisner, think of Riley Reiff, the ex-Iowa Hawkeye that was drafted by the Detroit Lions in the first round, played the tackle position, started out at left tackle. They drafted Taylor Decker. They kicked him over to right tackle. He ultimately ended up going to the Minnesota Vikings in free agency. And now the Vikings are talking about potentially kicking him inside to guard. Again, that's what I see potentially happening to a guy like Dalton Reisner. So, again, think he's going to be a guy that can easily play outside as a tackle, but if need be, kick inside to one of these interior offensive line positions, he won't miss a beat. You go from there to the next second round selection, 42nd. As a matter of fact, the very next selection after selecting Reisner, the Broncos got busy, got on the phones, called up the Cincinnati Bengals. They packaged up that pick they received from the Steelers in their first round trade back, 52nd overall. They packaged that up along with a 4th and a 6th rounder to come up to 42 to select a guy that I think they really coveted all along, but I didn't expect him to be here at this point in the draft, and I don't think the Broncos themselves expected him to be here either, and felt like there's no way we can pass up this type of value on a guy that we probably had a first-round grade on in Missouri. Quarterback Drew Lock. So I've already broken down Drew Lock in my Draft Prospects 101 series. For those of you who haven't watched that video, I talked very glowingly about Drew Lock. Anyone that has watched any of my draft videos and any of my mock drafts knows how I feel about Drew Lock. I thought he was the second best quarterback in this draft class behind Kyler Murray. And so I thought he was going to go in the first round. I was actually shocked when he didn't go in the first round. I thought someone would at least trade up into the back end of the first round to try to get this guy, and they just didn't. And for whatever reason, and everyone's got their reasoning as to why. Obviously, this was a deep defensive draft class, and maybe teams felt like it was better value to. And also keep in mind that not a lot of teams needed quarterbacks. And some teams punted on the quarterback position, like Miami, who could have used a quarterback, ultimately traded for Josh Rosen. But there weren't many teams that came into this process needing a quarterback. Arizona made themselves available to need a quarterback after dealing Josh Rosen. But you look at the way the league was set up going into this particular draft, not many teams. The Giants were looking for a quarterback, an heir apparent. The Broncos could have easily taken a quarterback in the first round, but they already had a starting quarterback. And so not many teams came into this draft desperate, like we got to have a guy. We got someone to start if need be. And so a guy like Drew Lock slips to the second round. Again, I did not see this coming. Let me reiterate that I didn't think he was going to slip out of the first round. In all the drafts that we've seen with teams reaching for quarterbacks and guys being over-selected, I was shocked to see a quarterback, the stature and ilk of a Drew Lock, not be selected in the first round. But ultimately, we're going to find out just how good he is and how right or wrong everyone was. And if this guy turns out to be a stud, then everyone was wrong. And he should have won the first round. If he turns out to be a dud, then everyone was right. He wasn't worthy of a first-round selection. Well, time will tell. I am a humongous, gigantic, enormous Drew Lock fan. Think this guy has enormous potential, immense potential. I think the sky's the limit for him. And I think with a quarterback like John Elway potentially giving him tutelage and in a situation, in an environment like Denver where there's talent around him and potentially a offensive line that may be able to protect him for years to come. This could be a great situation, and he doesn't have to play right away. If Joe Flacco is able to stay healthy, that's not something he's been able to do of late. But if Flacco is able to stay relatively healthy, he doesn't have to play right away. This could be a great situation for Locke. Maybe he gets thrusted into action sooner than later. We'll see. Bottom line is, you know how I feel about this guy. I don't have to explain to you much more than what I've already said. I think he brings a lot to the table. I've already broken him down, as I mentioned before, on the Draft Prospects 101 series, so I'm not going to do that here. I'll just tell you this. His comp, for me, is Carson Palmer, but there are a lot of people that think he's closer to Matthew Stafford. Either one of those comparisons are fine by me. He has a lot of similarities to Matthew Stafford's game, but I think he's closer to Palmer than he is Stafford. But nonetheless, both of those guys were number one overall picks. Both of those guys had tremendous NFL careers. Matthew Stafford is still in progress, may even ultimately be a Hall of Famer. I don't consider Stafford in that type of light, but his numbers will suggest otherwise when he hangs it up. Bottom line is, this guy has immense potential. Can't wait to see him get an opportunity in Denver in the second round, 42nd overall selection. Quarterback out of Missouri, Drew Lock. For me, you already know what this is. Let me take the QB off the list with the selection of Lock. You know what time it is.
Hits one high. Hits it deep. It is out of here.
So, 3 home runs back to back to start this draft off. I mean, that's the kind of value the Broncos got in the first 2 days of the draft. I mean, it was incredible value for the Denver Broncos, and they're not done in the second day of the draft. They've got more talent on the way in the third round in the form of the 71st pick in this draft. Ohio State defensive lineman Dre'Mont Jones is the selection. So, Dre'Mont Jones is going to take the defensive line off of their needs list. But let me state this right now. Denver at times was atrocious versus the run. And I don't think Dre'Mont Jones is going to do a lot to really help you in that department. I think where his value is its greatest is his ability to get into the backfield and get after the quarterback. Now, I'm going to read you some things that if you're looking for a guy to come in and be a stout run defender, this is not your guy. But he does have tremendous value. Let me assure you of that. But there were other guys, if you were looking for guys to help you stop the run, there were other guys available at this selection that could have helped you. Or you could have done it later on in the draft. You still had an additional 2 picks after this one. You could have dipped down and double dipped along the defensive line. We'll see what happens with your defensive line play this year. At times, like I said last year, whether it was injuries or just poor gap fits and placements, either way, your run defense was horrible. I mean, and I don't recall Denver's rush defense being that bad in quite some time. It was at times a joke, for a lack of a better term. And so, Dre'Mont Jones, not really going to help you in that regard. However, he brings a ton to the table. I love this pick as well. Let's get to Dre'Mont Jones and what he brings to the table. So, very highly skilled, undersized defensive tackle. So, again, reason why I don't think he's going to help you as much in the run game. He's undersized. Could he put on more weight? Sure. I think his frame suggests that he could put on a few more pounds. What does that do to his explosiveness and his athleticism? I don't know the answer to that. I'd much rather have Dre'Mont Jones playing at 280 and being the explosive, disruptive force that we've seen from him at Ohio State than him bulk up to 290 and not be the same guy. So those are things you have to take into consideration. That being said, he brings quickness and the ability to spin, swim, rip, and other tricks to the table, but also does things, some undersized things, okay? And what do I mean by some undersized things? Like play over the top of blocks. And I talked about this during my draft party, how there's a game against TCU early in the season in 2018, and TCU has like a 93-yard touchdown run, the longest run given up by Ohio State in the program's history. And The biggest problem on that particular snap was Dre'Mont Jones went over top of a block, opening up a gaping hole. Had he just stayed in his gap and maybe not gotten off his block, but just stayed in that gap, that run doesn't go for 93 yards and a touchdown. It may have gone for 11 yards. It may have gone for 17 yards. It doesn't go for 93 and a touchdown. But because he went over top of a block, moving himself and removing himself from that gap, there was no resistance. That those backside defenders didn't have time to come over and make a play, and that guy was off to the races and he was gone for a touchdown. And that's what you get. That's being undersized, trying to make a play and playing out of your gap. And so you'll see him jumping out of his gap, and that can prove very costly, as I just mentioned. And I saw him do it again in another game versus Maryland. So this isn't a one-time offense. This is a guy that will jump out of his gap, will play over top of blocks, will try to get in the backfield and make a play. And in doing so, sometimes he won't be gap sound, he won't be gap disciplined, and it can cost you in a major way. Remember, defense is about 11 guys all on the same page. Yeah, it's nice when you have standout players making standout plays, but in any event, what you want to have, if all else fails, is 11 guys all on the same page doing their job to the best of their abilities. And when you get, all you need is one guy not doing his job to F it all up on the defensive side of the football. Same can be said on the offensive side as well. He's long, pause, and talented, but somewhat of a tweener at 6'3", 281 pounds. And keep in mind, he's got 34-inch arms. There's so much to like with this guy and what he brings to the table. But he's a tweener. And so I think his best position is as a 3-tech. I think he's a guy you kick inside, and there's a mismatch there to be had against slower interior offensive linemen, centers and guards that can't deal with his quickness and can't deal with his ability to get off the snap and use a spin or use a rip and time up the snap and use a swim move and get into the backfield. He's so quick. He's so elusive. He's so long, pause, that there are so many things that he does that can affect a football game. So I love this pick. I think he's a guy that can come in and immediately prove to have huge dividends for this Broncos defense. Again, is he going to help against the run? He'll make some splash plays and some flash plays in the run game, tackle for losses here and there, but he could be a liability in the run game. Who's to say? I don't know what the Broncos are going to ask him to do. I can tell you this much. I love this selection because this guy is talented. Not only can he help you in the run game from a tackle for loss standpoint or a disruptor, doesn't even have to make the play. He dives into the backfield and cuts off a running back's track, and all of a sudden he's got to stop his feet and try to cut it back, and now here comes the cavalry. He can do those types of things too, but he's a pass rusher, and we know how big it is in this league to get interior pass rush. When you can do that, you can be an outstanding defense, and he brings that to the table. And so to me, my comp for him is Michael Bennett. That's high praise, but I see the same kind of tweener mentality. He's got that same kind of body type of a Michael Bennett, that same long frame with long arms and the quickness to win against interior offensive linemen. I think this guy has the chance to be a big-time problem at the next level. In the third round, 71st pick overall, the Ohio State University defensive lineman Dre'Mont Jones, for me, is so you move on to the final two picks of this Broncos draft, one in the fifth, one in the sixth. We'll tackle this fifth rounder first. 156th overall selection, linebacker out of Oregon, Justin Hollins is the selection. So Justin Hollins was impressive at the combine, a guy that I looked at, I said, all arms, all legs, just as long as you can possibly be, paused in terms of a defender. And what I thought to myself is, this is what Oregon produces. They produce long, rangy defenders. Think of Eric Armstead. Think of DeForest Buckner. Think of Deion Jones. What's the Deion Jordan? Deion Jordan. And now you look at another long Oregon defender in Justin Hollins. It all makes sense. Schools generally recruit the same types of athletes, and he kind of fits that bill of a long, rangy defender. And so I don't know exactly what the Broncos are going to do with him. I think this is an interesting pick. So we'll go ahead and take linebacker off of their roster needs and draft needs here. I think that he showed some ability to move. As a matter of fact, let me read this and I'll explain as we move forward. A rangy, easy-moving defender that tested well at the combine and showed the ability to rush and drop at Oregon. So let me stop right there. So at the combine, the thing that impressed me the most is he ran a 4.5 40, which is blazing fast for a guy that's 6'5", 250 pounds, essentially. And then you watched him in the conversion drills or you watched him just turn his hips. He looked fluid. He looked natural in that setting. They had him drop at Oregon and rush, and he looked like a guy that was very comfortable doing both. I don't think he excelled at either one. I just think he was solid at both. And so, keeping with the theme of this breakdown, his length is a strength that needs to be utilized more. Meanwhile, his quickness and ability to run may be his calling card at the next level. While he isn't great at any one thing, Hollins, if molded and deployed correctly, could be a solid pro. Also has a knack for forcing fumbles, 8 forced fumbles over the last 2 seasons. So let's dive into that. So when I watched him on tape at Oregon, you could see a guy with some extreme length that when he used his length, he beat tackles around the edge. There's a play against, and I'm trying to think, was it Stanford? I want to say it was against Stanford that I'm watching him, and he beats the tackle around the edge with length. He slaps his hands down immediately off the snap, beats him with speed, slaps the hand down, and gets around the edge and forces the fumble of Costello. And that's what he brings to the table. He has that kind of ability, but he doesn't do it very often. All right, you don't see that from him often enough. Then I saw another move, and I can't recall what game I was watching, but I see it might have been against Michigan State in the final bowl game, or it could have been that same Stanford game. But he goes hard outside, back inside, uses his length to latch and snatch, and almost get to the quarterback, but pressures him and forces him out of the pocket. And I'm like, where's that at? Where's that been? I haven't seen enough of that. And so he's got some stuff. There's some juice there, and there are some tools that, if tapped into, this guy could be something as an edge rusher. I watched him drop. While he's not uncomfortable, he doesn't look totally comfortable dropping either. So there's something to be said about that. The Broncos currently lack a speed linebacker that can run in coverage. You know, you got Josie Jewell and you got some of these other guys that are thumpers, but you don't necessarily have the guy with speed like you used to when you were in your heyday, when you had guys that could run. You don't have that anymore. So he could serve as that guy for you if they deem that he's comfortable enough in space running with tight ends down the seam and with running backs out of the backfield. And we'll see. And I listened to Vic Fangio talk in the press conference, and they asked him about, you know, what they see with, Hollins, Justin Hollins. And he said, look, this guy did a little bit of everything at Oregon. He dropped in the coverage. He rushed the quarterback. So he plays him outside linebacker. He plays him inside. We're going to play him at both and see which one he flourishes at. And that's where we'll go from once we figure out where he's most comfortable. And so I think he's more comfortable as an edge rusher, but the Broncos could use a guy that can run as an inside linebacker. So we'll see what happens with Justin Hollins. To me, the comp for him is Obum Gwacham. And I know a lot of you are like, who? I remember watching this guy that was just as long as, you couldn't find a longer defender than Obum Gwacham out of Oregon State. And this was in the 2015 draft. And he was raw, and he was an ex-wide receiver, and he just had turned over to the defensive side. And he didn't know what the hell he was doing, but you could see there was a lot of raw talent there as a pass rusher. And the Seahawks took him, and he's probably still in the league right now. I don't know if he is or not, but there was definitely some talent there. And I see the same thing here in Justin Hollins. There's talent here. Will it be tapped into is the big question. And what will be his calling card? Will he be an inside linebacker that runs with some of these athletically gifted tight ends and backs out of the backfield, or is he going to be a platoon rusher? Is he going to be a guy you throw into the mix and maybe he takes on a Shane Ray role where he's a Shaq Barrett for you off the bench in a relief role where he comes in on the third down every so often and tries to get to the quarterback. We'll see. But in any event, 5th round, 156th overall pick. Oregon edge rusher, linebacker, Justin Hollins for me is and we wrap up this draft in the 6th round, 187th pick overall, wide receiver out of Colorado, Juwann Winfree is the pick. So, looking at the Broncos roster, we know E-Man Sand is in the final year of his deal. There were questions as to whether the Broncos would cut him or keep him coming off of the major injury. They decided to keep him. I think it's a good move, especially if he's going to be ready for the start of the season. Don't know if he will be or not, but E-Man Sand still one of the better technicians, route runners in this league, and still a guy that I think is vital in your wide receiver room to helping these other young wide receivers, if nothing else. So love the fact that they're holding on to him, but eventually you're going to have to move on from him. You've got some young receivers. Obviously, you drafted a big receiver last year in Cortland Sutton in the 2nd round out of SMU. You also like the Penn State receiver that you drafted last year in Hamilton. And so you've got some stuff at receiver, but we don't know if any of it is elite yet, and we don't know how much stuff you have at receiver at this point. And so I thought you needed to add some more to that mix in Denver at the receiver position. And here you do exactly that in the 6th round in a hometown product out of Colorado in Juwann Winfree. And I didn't know what to expect going into his tape because I didn't hear a lot about this guy coming into the process. He was not at the combine, so I wasn't privy to him coming into this situation. So I was anxious to see what this guy brought to the table. I looked at his numbers before I watched his tape. I didn't see numbers that jumped out at me, so I was thinking, what's with this guy? I know there are a number of guys that went undrafted that had much better numbers, that have a lot of upside, and here this guy is in the 6th round getting drafted. What's the deal? And then I turned on the tape, and I found out exactly why he was a 6th round selection here by the Denver Broncos. To me, and let's take the wide receiver position off the board, and so now you see the Denver Broncos have handled every single need that I had for them going into this draft. That's 6 picks, 6 needs, all knocked down one by one. I tip my cap to John Elway and his staff. But Juwann Winfree, for me, this is the type of player you take a flyer on in the later rounds, okay? Tons of talent and ability. A few red flags, generally what you get with these later round guys. A few red flags. He transferred from Maryland after being suspended indefinitely. He was initially suspended for a couple of games, and then he broke another team rule and violation, and they suspended him indefinitely, and so he decided to transfer. All right, so he goes to a JUCO for a year, comes and ends up landing in Colorado. Then limited production due to injuries. All right, again, this is another mark of a late round potential gem. Limited production due to injuries. So he gets to Colorado's campus in 2016, ready to try to make a name for himself, tears his ACL, misses the entire 2016 season. Finally gets a chance in 2017, but only starts 2 games. Then he's the clear-cut starter in 2018 and misses 4 games due to an injury. So production is limited because of injuries, but nonetheless, the talent is there nonetheless. That's undeniable. All right, good hands, can elevate to make tough catches, has some speed. You watched him against USC in 2017 because I wanted to go search for a game where he just blew up. And that was one of his biggest games, was against USC in 2017. And he had a couple of big balls in that game, big catches. And there were some nasty double moves in those games where he was able to shake free. So he had some speed after the catch. Make a move, make a guy miss, and then took off to the races. Runs a 4.5 40, ran that at his pro day, so he can run. And he adjusted. And I also put down here, deceptive route runner. As I just talked about, broke some dudes off on tape. Watched him against Nebraska in 2018. Had some clean routes in that game. Watched him against USC in 2017. nasty routes. And I mean, there was a double move there where he bends out to the corner, goes to the post, back out, or actually goes to the post, back out to the corner, back to the post. And I mean, he literally left that guy at the bus stop. It was nasty. So he's got some craftiness to him when he's running his routes. He needs work freeing himself from contact at and around the line of scrimmage. Too many times I see guys lay hands on him and him find it too tough to disengage from them. One time he even ended up on the ground. He's just got to find ways to get guys' hands off of him and do it sooner rather than later. Also, he has to adjust to coverages. If it's man, he needs to learn how to sit down. Or excuse me, if it's zone, he needs to learn how to sit down. If it's man to man, he needs to remember to keep running. But also, he's got to figure out where is a good space for him to land. Sometimes he's running into defenders that are in zone coverage. He's got to figure out how to navigate his way through traffic. These are all things he'll, with more experience. This is a guy that didn't play a ton again. So with more experience, I think these things will come. And then he's got to learn how to adjust to underthrown ball. There's a ball against Nebraska. He's wide open. Broke a dude off on a double move again. Wide ass open. Is a poorly thrown ball by the quarterback. All he has to do is stop, come back, and go up. I've seen him go up and go get footballs. So I know he's capable. And instead, he keeps running and is waiting for the football to come and allows the safety from the other side of the field to come in and almost pick it off. And so it's just little nuances like that, little things like that he's got to work on, among other things. He's got other things he needs to work on too. But the talent, again, is undeniable. It's there, and that's why the Broncos are intrigued here in the sixth round. If his head is in the game and he's healthy, he could be another local steal for the Denver Broncos. Remember, they got one of the biggest steals in last year's, well, not draft because he went undrafted, but Lindsey last year was a revelation. No one saw coming, but Philip Lindsay lit it up, ended up being a Pro Bowler, and you're hoping that you can strike gold twice at Colorado in as many years. And so Juwann Winfree is very intriguing here in the sixth round, and I won't count this guy out. I think he's got something to him. To me, my comp for him is Jermaine Kearse of the Seattle Seahawks and the latest coronation, the Jets. Yeah, he's no longer in the league as of right now, but it wouldn't shock me if he got a phone call after a receiver or two drop in training camp because the guy's talented. And so he reminds me a lot of Jermaine Kearse, man. I see a lot of those same capabilities in him. And so I think this guy has a chance to have NFL sticking power. Again, if his head is in the game and he's able to stay healthy, something he wasn't able to do while at Colorado. So in the sixth round, 187th pick overall, wide receiver out of Colorado, Juwann Winfree for me is so that's the Broncos draft in a nutshell, man. That's an impressive haul. I mean, 3 home runs, a triple, and 2 doubles and 6 picks. I mean, as you can see, they knocked out every single need that I had for them on their draft needs. I mean, you can't do it much better than that. Now, how will these guys play out on the field is a different story, but on paper, you've got to admit this was one hell of a draft. Even if you don't like John Elway, this was one hell of a draft by John Elway and staff. Let's take a look at the score that they were able to garner off of this phenomenal draft. So that's going to do it for the Denver Broncos in their 2019 NFL draft. I don't think anyone's in this series is going to beat that score. I really don't think anyone's going to approach that score. I mean, this is a phenomenal draft. Like I said, egg, bread, cheese, milk approach. Get your 6 items on your list and get out. That's essentially what they did in this draft, making a couple of maneuvers to come up, which gave away draft capital later in the draft. But they didn't care because they got the items they were out to get. And I can't be mad at the Broncos in this draft. I'm your man, Louie Tee, signing off. Remember, if it's not your man T, it's not the best NFL coverage. It could be. Also, check out the Louie Tee Network podcast, available on Stitcher, Google Music Play, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, and of course, the website, LouieTeeNetwork.net. Also, subscribe to the Louie Tee Network on YouTube. Much more Denver Broncos content, as well as the NFL. I cover all 32 teams in the National Football League. So if you're new to this channel, welcome. Subscribe to the Louie Tee Network for more great content. I'm your man, Louie Tee, signing off. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time. Have a good one.